So, if easy and difficult mean anything in the real world, this video will lean towards the difficult side. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about a class I'll be teaching for the Shift Network in February. And so far, they've been so cool about everything. They're so helpful. The class I'll be teaching will be kind of like this, except organized and interactive. And so it'll be a 7-week class, 90 minutes live every week, interacting, doing exercises, inquiries. And the title is From Neuron to Know Self. And they were so cool that allowed me to give away a few seats in the class. It's a few $100. It's really reasonably priced, but not everyone has a few $100 or so. Anyway, I can give away a few seats in the class, and I'll do it by maybe looking in the comment section, just doing something random, and maybe those who've commented more will enter into this thing, and just see if if that's something you're digging, and cool either way. Okay, so let's get back from that story to this video that is about the illusion of stories. And when I say stories are illusion, it's the same as saying the self is an illusion, because again, the self is just a story. And when I say illusion, what I mean is when you put the spotlight of consciousness on it, there's nothing to experience. It disappears. And that's the thing about us modern humans. We're captivated by gossip and social media, philosophies, movies, books, literature. All of it is so story-based, and it feels like it has meaning. But the point of the video is that's an illusion. It only feels like there's something there, regardless of how much it may move our emotions. So other species, they may jump out of the water, a whale jumps out of the water. That's all experiential based. And, the whale isn't going to go and, post on social media. That's the thing about us modern humans. It's gotten so bad that we rarely have a pure experience anymore. The storytelling has taken over to an extent that our phones are right there. We're ready to tell a story about what happened rather than just be in the moment of what happened. And so gossip, movies, books, social, all these things, they're just kind of made up. They're baked into our existence now. And again, that's not always the case. And it's not a good thing. And the stories, so what are you doing when you're mind wandering half of the day? Well, you're storytelling, fantasizing about what your ego thinks should have happened rather than what did. And that's the thing, though. When we put a story on the table and try to dissect it, you might say, well, there is a beginning and a middle and an end, but a beginning, middle, and an end to what? Where is it? And this kind of started with me when I was doing stories about the left brain interpreter. I'd be lecturing, and I've done hundreds and hundreds of times this lecture about the left brain interpreter, and how the left brain makes stories. It creates narratives about what might be happening around it. And no one ever really questioned me on it. And there was this weird sense of like something's wrong. What do you mean an interpretation? What is an interpretation? And you can give examples where, the left brain interpreter using the voice in the head, it may tell stories like, well, that couple looks miserable, that person looks rich. And it's always doing this. But what is it? When you say, well, that person looks rich, it seems to make sense to us. But does it? Is there anything really tangible? Is there anything that can be experienced? And even the word rich is actually quite meaningless because it's completely relative. And rich in what? Maybe we mean money, but maybe we mean something else. And so not all language is like this. There are words like gold. When I use the word gold, there is something in the physical world that can be experienced. And you can point to that sound and say, well, here's what I mean when I use the word gold, or water, or sky, or lake, or mountain. These things are easily pointed to in the real world, so they're useful. But when we get to the storytelling, and I want to pick on a particular story, because Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell were, in a way, detectives when it comes to storytelling. And what they discovered is, well, they called it archetypes. And these are these kind of primitive patterns of storytelling that you find across the world's cultures. And so when George Lucas was making Star Wars, he didn't say, well, I'm just going to create a new movie. He wanted to use these archetypes, tell the same old story, but something that it's kind of ingrained in our patterns in our mind. And Jung called this the collective unconscious. That's why, it's something that's shared. And I'm not so sure about the unconscious part, but the sharing part is certainly something to kind of focus on. And in Star Wars, of course, we have the hero, we have the villain, we've got, the outlaw, the princess. We got all these characters. And I only want to focus on the hero. So when we talk about Luke and we talk about the hero, there's qualities about the story of a hero. Things like bravery, facing challenges, coming from poverty, going on a father quest. And we see that that's exactly what Luke's story was all about. But it was bigger than that. And Joseph Campbell even defined a hero as someone who takes on a challenge far bigger than their own life. So they risk their own life for something much, much bigger. And of course, we're not talking about like a skyscraper or something physically bigger than the body. We're talking about an idea that's bigger than their own personal idea. And that's what Luke did. And when he went on some of the challenges in the real world, when he went into the cave, well, he just walked into a cave. That's the real world. But in this abstract storytelling world, that's where it all gets interesting, because he is battling himself. He's battling his fears. But of course, none of that can withstand the light of consciousness. But let's take maybe the biggest moment in the Star Wars movies, when Luke blew up the Death Star. Now, what's happening in the real world? In the real world, Luke, and we could just point to his meat suit when we use that term, is flying an X-Wing. And he's flying it. He rejects using the computer, puts it away, shoots, blows up the Death Star, this giant metal machine. But that's just what happened in the real world. That's not why the movie was so popular. The movie didn't tap into reality. It tapped into our storytelling ability, because in the storytelling, that wasn't just Luke. Luke was working on behalf of the Force, the positive side of the Force, to, it's good versus evil. And so when he blew up the Death Star, he didn't just blow up a metal machine, he conquered evil. And that's why people applauded. Now the problem is okay, well, all these aspects that are bigger than himself, can we see or experience directly any of them? And that's the point. Well, you can't. And when we cheered for the story. In other words, we cheered for an illusion. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, you could look at our storytelling ability, which doesn't exist in the real world, as maybe something that evolved in the universe. Maybe aliens don't tell stories. We rarely ever consider that. Aliens could be like the Peter Han. They're totally in the here and now. And they have no clue why we are so obsessed with stories. But it all kind of reminds me of that line from that 80s band, The Cars. And the lyrics go something like, if the illusion... what is it? If the illusion is real, let it take you for a ride. And again, if the illusion seems real, we'll change the lyrics. If the illusion seems real, let us take it for a ride. Because in another movie, let's look at Titanic, I think 90s movie. And in the Titanic, again, we know it's all a story. And it's dreadful. Poor Jack is in the freezing water, slowly dying, when, people wonder, could he have been saved? Could he have climbed up on that piece of wood? More and more stories about stories, because none of that ever happened. And yet, even though it never happened, because Jack is nowhere. Jack is a story that we can't find. It only exists, like the self, it only exists when we're thinking about it. It only exists when we think we're thinking about it, because we can't really zoom in on it consciously because it doesn't exist. And of course, we can go to the theater and enjoy these stories, even if they're a horror story, even Halloween, even if it's a scary story. We really, that's why we do the jump scare, because we're having fun being afraid. But the moment we walk out of the theater, suddenly there's nothing else except stories, but these ones seem dreadfully real. Where is my car? Oh, that's right, I have to go home and pay bills. And you get ownership and self-identity. And these stories all become dreadfully serious. And so one of the things, kind of an inquiry we could ponder on, a few inquiries with this video, and probably the main one is, when you're doing your storytelling, can you become conscious of any of it? Again, the hero or the villain or the victim. And so it's very common for us to tell poor me stories. And you can focus on that. Well, what do you mean poor me? Oh, why is that? So maybe you're describing something that actually did happen, but you're weaving it in to a story, and that's what you're really doing. That's the poor me concept. It's kind of amazing. So many of us live lives in terms of physical means far greater than kings and queens in the past, and yet we can still tell these poor me stories. And that's because we are we say Homo sapiens, one who knows. But and if I knew what storytelling was in Latin, I could probably be more clever. But we are really one who tells stories, and we're telling stories that do not exist, but somehow still captivate our emotions, and they seem entertaining, even though they're just illusions. But the last thing I'll leave you with is why. It's another thing, an inquiry we can ponder on. Why is it that we can have so much fun with stories on some level? Going to the theater, watching scary movies, action movies that are dreadfully serious, and we can have so much fun with that. But why can't we live that way with the rest of our lives? Why can't Chris just be a story? Chris's career could just be a story. The idea that I own any of this is just a story, and we take it with the same whimsical laughter that we would if we were watching a comedy.